didn't know smile or what.
So all my life, grades have defined me. I have put a lot of stock into the grades that I've received at school. I believed for much of my life that grades have defined my intelligence and who I am as a person. But what if I told you that this isn't true? What if I told you I'm wrong? Yes, I said I'm wrong. What if I told you that grades are just a letter on a piece of paper? Grades are good for judging whether schools or teachers are meeting certain criteria. However, they're not good or accurate for judging your self-worth or who you are as a person or your intelligence even. Grades are a small part of our lives. They cause unnecessary psychological disorders, and people actually learn differently than others. Sometimes we feel grades are the biggest part of our lives. We go to school for 5 days a week, for 8 hours a day, from 12 to 16 years. In every school around the country, a grade is assigned for each and every class. So that's a lot of time that you spend getting grades. So we start to get caught up in that grades define us and that they are part of who we are as a person. However, it's actually a small part of who we are as a person. They're actually a small part of our lives. Per references.com, the average person spends around 15% of their life in school. That is considering that the average person lives to be around 79. This statistic only applies to people who have completed kindergarten through 12th grade. Now, if you add in somebody going to get their bachelor's degree, this adds an extra 4% onto your life. So even with that, it's only 15 to 29% of your life that's actually spent in school. So if you do the math right, you still have 71% of your life left to live after all that schooling. So grades are just a really small part of your life. They don't define us, and they should not. While we are going through this small part of our lives, we are being graded, and we should remember that the rest of our lives are still very much ahead of us. We all have our own personalities as well. Some of us like to be around big crowds, and some of us like to be secluded, like myself. Some of us are sassy, and some of us are confident. The list could go on and on. However, when we receive the same grade as somebody else, we tend to think that we are the same person as them, but we're not. We all have different personalities, hobbies, traits, things that we like to do that other people don't. So just because you get the same grade as somebody else doesn't mean that you're the same person. Your intelligence and your worth may be different than theirs. We are all not the same person, but most of us have pressure to receive these good grades in school, which causes unnecessary anxiety and stress on people. According to Stanford News, pressure from parents and teachers begins as early as elementary school. That's pretty early. Stanford News also states that some teachers are now viewing it as a health epidemic. They interviewed Janice Clark Pope, a lecturer in the School of Education, and she said, I quote, "The number one cause of visits to Vaden Health Center used to be relationships, but now it's stress and anxiety. This should be a red flag to all educational institutes that they're putting too much stress on the grades that people receive." It's also important to note that people actually learn differently. A test may not accurately define or measure the information that you know. People process information differently. They retrieve information differently. And because they process and retrieve that information, the way they put it back on the test is going to be much different than somebody else who processes it and retrieves it differently. So this is going to change the scores that people receive on grades if only one test is given. According to the website Teach.com in their article, all students are created equal. There are 3 main different styles of learners. There's visual, auditory, and reading and writing preferences, and also kinesthetic. Visual learners prefer to learn with images, while auditory learners prefer to listen to a textbook or to listen to a lecture. Writers and readers like to write out an essay or to read a textbook, and kinesthetics like to do hands-on type of learning. In this article, do student learning styles translate to different testing styles? They found that students who had options to take different tests with their learning style noted a 4.2% rise in their grades. That's a lot. Unfortunately, a lot of schools don't utilize this, and students tend to think that they're worth less because of this. Also, people who didn't get graded or go to school have become really successful people. Per fundersandfounders.com, Steve Jobs is one of those people. Steve Jobs dropped out of college. He didn't drop out of college because he wasn't a good student. He didn't drop out of college because he couldn't get good grades. He dropped out of college because he just really couldn't afford it. Instead, Jobs decided to drop in on classes, He didn't pay for them, and he didn't get graded for them, and he didn't get any credit for them. However, he has created one of the biggest companies in the world, Apple. So as you can see, the grades never defined Steve Jobs, and you shouldn't let them define you either. My question for you today is, are you going to let the grades define you? Are you going to keep living under the pressure that one grade tells you who you are as a person and who you are in your intelligence level? Learning the information and actually knowing the information is differently. So if you've learned the information, if you walked out of a class saying, I know that information, then you're smart. You're intelligent and you know what you're doing. Grades shouldn't define you, because school that comes with grades is a very short part of your lives. You also have a family, friends. You are a person outside of those grades. And it causes undue stress and anxiety if you put the stress on yourself to get those good grades. Last and finally not least, grades should not define you, because you can still be successful without receiving good grades. Look at Steve Jobs. So I ask you to consider my speech today and remember that a grade cannot and will not and should not define you as a person.
Yay!